Truth, lies, shenanigans.
Rob B., you want to talk about the trucker who was sentenced to 110 years in prison for an accident. Tell us more.
All right, so a little bit of history. This was an incident that happened in 2019. Rogel Aguilera-Mederos was driving a transport truck
What's his
at
name
the
again?
time.
What is it?
Rogel
It's so fluid.
Aguilera-Mederos.
Okay.
And what happened was his truck plowed into a series of vehicles that had slowed on the roadway because of another wreck. And the resulting crash and fireball consumed the vehicles and melted parts of the highway and ended up taking the lives of 4 people. This got Rogel 110 years in prison. So this past week, Colorado Governor Jared Polis shortened the prison sentence of Aguilera-Mederos to 10 years, drastically reducing the original term of 110 years. And this came after there was an online petition that over 5 million people signed seeking clemency for him. So at this point, I'm very curious to get some reactions from my co-hosts, and I'm just curious if this is something that the U.S. justice system should be doing, just undergo a review of really long sentences to see if this was a fair sentence or if these are sentences that should be commuted.
All right, let's start with Lizzie.
I think the bigger question for me, Rob, here is this a case of unfair prosecution versus the actual sentence? Because the DA, the prosecutor had the discretion. He was charged with 23 counts
Yep,
in this case,
23 counts. Yep.
all of which had mandatory sentences, if you will. He didn't have to charge him that heavily. He knew what the consequences were that it could potentially be if he was convicted on all charges, that he would get 110 years and the judge wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be noted that on the prosecution side, he didn't start petitioning, if you will, that, okay, maybe the sentences should be lowered until there was an outcry by the public. He was all
Right.
for it.
Yeah.
And even once the governor of Colorado came out and, commuted it and said, okay, I'm going to X 100 years, he's going to get 10 years, he could possibly be out in 6. He has since come back, the prosecution has since come back and said, well, we're very disappointed. We were petitioning, if there was going to be a change, it should have been 20 to 30 years. So the prosecution knew what it was doing.
Yeah, they knew. And they still
And
wanted to go aggressive.
yeah, they want it. So I think there needs to, if we're going to look into how this plays out in terms of how convicted criminals are sentenced, we also need to, look into what these prosecutors are doing with overcharging people.
Mm-hmm.
But my biggest issue with possibly getting rid of minimum sentencing, um, or is that we have cases like Brock Turner. Okay. Or we have cases like Ethan Couch. Ethan Couch was the kid the 16-year-old in Texas a few years ago whose defense claimed that he not guilty per affluenza, even though he was drunk at 16, crashed his car, killed 4 people, injured 9 others, including his friends. He got 10 years probation. He got no jail time.
Mm.
Or you could think about Brock Turner out in California. He was the Stanford University student who got caught by 2 bystanders walking down the street, caught raping a unconscious young lady in an alley.
Mm-hmm.
The judge in that case, because there was no, minimum sentencing standards, the judge in that case gave him 6 months, and he got out in 3. And so you have to also think about, a lot of these judges are, even though they're supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
unbiased, they have a very political mind, political, ideologies of what's going on. And even in this case, it has since come out, the governor in this case had to acknowledge that this young man, a member of his family, works in the governor's office.
Oh, really?
So you tell me, the governor acknowledged it, had to acknowledge it before it came out in the media. So
in the
he
news.
acknowledged it, although he says that had no bearing on his decision whatsoever. But you have to think,
All right. So let me ask this question. So Gianni, as Lizzie was pointing out, this sentence was not decided by the judge. It was decided by the jury based on mandatory minimums and concurrent sentences for certain convictions. So again, the prosecution knowing this. So given that we've often discussed judges giving discriminatory sentences to people of color or people without color, um, uh, do you think it's better to have judges deciding sentences, or for the sentences to be inherent for certain convictions, thereby reducing discriminatory sentences? What do you think, Gianni?
That's a good question. By inherent, you mean that it's just based on the law. Like if you did this,
If
it
you're convicted,
automatically gets
if
this
you're
sentence.
convicted of rape, then your minimum sentence is 5 years. If you're convicted of killing someone, your minimum sentence is 15 years. Do
Life.
you
I
believe
feel like
that's
that can. I feel like is there a different alternative than that because that can even have its issues without reviewing the case. I think it's personally to answer your question better than having a judge and their bias and their discriminatory like sentencing. I agree. I think that that's a better alternative, but I feel like that alternative could have some drawbacks. It could
or,
have some things wrong with it as
Robbie? What do you think about the bias?
Um, it's interesting the way that you brought it up, and immediately what came to mind was you can accidentally kill someone. There can be a set of circumstances that will bring about a loss of life, and it may have been outside of your control, or there was no malicious intent. You can't accidentally rape someone, so I think that we have to be very careful when we're comparing these things. So I think that in
well. Right.
certain instances, sure, if there are mitigating circumstances where you could have avoided or the situation was unavoidable once things got going, sure. But I'm sorry, rape isn't one of those things.
But
That's a pretty
within the
cut and
eyes
dry
of the
one for me.
law, but within the eyes of the law, certain things qualify as rape, where even though they're consensual, where it really isn't rape. You could have, an 18-year-old having sex with a 17-year-old, with a 16-year-old, and that's declared in certain states rape, statutory
Mhm.
rape, but rape
It's not
nonetheless.
rape.
So
Definitely.
it just depends on the wording and it depends on the law. If you go to the comments, I like so Jacqueline Robinson works in the legal field. She's a paralegal for a prominent divorce firm here in Washington, D.C. But she said judges should be able to have some discretion
Yep.
in sentencing
Hmm.
despite minimum mandatory sentences. And I think that would have
I
worked
agree.
well in this case because you could tell the judge did not
He did
want
not. He didn't agree with it.
to give that 110 years. The judge wanted no part of that, but his hands were tied. So I agree with her on that front in that there should be a way, some type of loophole, if you will, that would allow judges to step in and be like, okay, we're overcharging here.
She also said
This
this
is a
should
bit.
be done on a case by case basis. What happened here was
Mhm,
clearly overreach by the prosecutors. But George
mhm.
Fournier says, I've never been a fan of mandatory minimums. A judge should always have the ultimate discretion so as to avoid such situations. Fortunate for this young man that the governor stepped in. But we've seen in the past judges having discretion, what that's led to, particularly, I mean, it may be different in Canada. I don't know. Robbie, correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. But here in the United States, the discrimination issue is significant. The prejudice towards people of
Yeah.
color has been out.
Or
It's
not
just
even
crazy.
just people of color,
Or
also poor
privilege.
people. Yeah, yeah,
Privilege.
people of privilege. Yeah, people of privilege, because you
Classism.
have a lot of
Yeah,
judges
we had that
over the
discussion
past
before. It's
10
about
years
privilege. Hmm.
Yeah.
a lot of judges here over the last 10 years who've gotten in trouble because they are in bed with a lot of prison. So if they hand down to some juveniles, guilty sentence, okay, where normally they would get some type of probation or something. No, because the judge is getting kickback from this particular prison. If he sentences a convicted person to that particular prison, he gets like $10,000. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to weigh. Our justice system is a mess, and this is proof positive on
Yeah.
both sides because
Mm.
initially I was pissed off at the prosecutor. I'm like, you did not have to
The
charge him
prosecutor's the one to look at. Yep.
all of those charges. You could have done half, and if he was found innocent on half of those, then you have the other half to come back. No double jeopardy. Come back with the other half and try to retry the case. But
I mean,
don't
granted, he killed
know.
4 people, but there was another comment from Kevin Thaxton that says, why wasn't the company that owns the truck charged for their negligence? Because from my
Yes.
understanding, from reading the article, it was the brakes that failed, right?
It was
So,
mechanical failure.
right.
Yeah.
But
So
it
it
begs the
wasn't,
question. But it begs the question: one, did the company know that there was something wrong with the brakes? And
and
two,
he
like
was
what
speeding as well.
he was
So,
speeding. He was going over 80 miles per hour in a big tractor trailer.
right. Which I don't know. It's not unusual. I've seen trucks going that fast on the. All I'm saying is, I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying I've seen it, and it's people. It's an accident. I see it as an accident. 110 years is crazy for someone making
Absolutely ridiculous.
making a mistake.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Because we've all been there where we've done something stupid and
Bet-
there are
bet up.
consequences for it. In most cases, we haven't seen the type of consequences he has, but at the same time, 110 years is just his entire life for making a mistake. Is too much. Should he have been? So, what do we think the years he should have got? He
I
reduced
was
it to
going to ask
10.
that too.
He
I was
reduced
going
it
to,
to 10 from 110. What do you think, Gianni? How
10,
many?
10, 10, and he could get out in 6.
Oh,
10,
I didn't.
and he
Okay,
can get out
10
in
and get
6.
out in 6.
Yeah.
Okay, didn't know that. All right.
I feel as if he should serve. Well, I feel like it would be right for him to serve a few years, 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5.
I
Okay.
can't be a judge. I would let everybody free. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Because I feel like
I believe that actually.
See, I
hustlers.
would be the
I just
complete
feel like
opposite. I would be the life, life.
What do you think, Rob?
No, I think. Go ahead, Rob.
It it's sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there.
How many
Totally
years do you
brain
think he
farted.
should get?
I would say I'm not a judge. I'm not trained in these legal matters. 10 years seems
But
reasonable
you're the
to
judge
me.
today. If his life
20
depends on you, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess I would really need all of the evidence in front of me to properly weigh what happened. But I
Rob's
think
not
that
budging.
10 years seems to be reasonable on the surface. I know that they were looking at maybe 20 to 30. But I think that 10 years, I would really need to know all the details of the case before I could really lay that down. But it doesn't seem like this was intentional. And I mean, when we look at a 110-year sentence, it's pretty disproportionate when you compare it against inmates who have committed intentional, premeditated
Mm-hmm.
vehicular
Murder.
homicide, even,
Or
right?
DUIs and
So
stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know. I think
Yeah.
10 years is reasonable with the
And I
option
consider
to get out
DUIs
with good
intentional, by
behavior.
the way.
Oh hell yeah, hell yeah.
And
Me
your
too.
thoughts, Liz? How many years?
I would say 15. I would say
I was thinking
10
10 to
15.
15. Yeah.
10 to 15.
Why?
Because
He
people need to
he
understand
was
there's a huge
negligent.
there's a huge responsibility when you are
He was
driving a
speeding.
vehicle. And he was speeding. You can't be speeding down a highway over 80 miles an hour in a tractor trailer. Like you can't
And he
stop
failed to
as
do
easily
proper
as you could.
maintenance.
Exactly. So there has to be some accountability for that.
Mhm.
But to
Yeah.
Kevin Thaxton's question, whereas I don't think the
What's his
actual
question?
trucking companies
Oh, okay. Yes.
can be held liable for this criminally, the family should go after them in a civil court, like
Civilly.
civil suit. This
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
screams lawsuit. This screams lawsuit because again, 4
Yeah.
lives. It was what a 28 car pileup. 4 people died, not other people injured. Yeah, there has to be some
He has to
accountability
have some
here.
accountability.
There has
I'm
to
in
be.
agreement with Liz on the 10 to 15 years. I just think, and it's about justice as well. I mean, 4 people died. I mean, and you can't
Yeah.
just gloss that over and be like, he made a mistake and it's okay. No, 4 people died. And, if my family members, I want some sense of justice along with, I'd understand, but there's got to be some punishment for making those mistakes.
I have a question because I don't
Go
have a
ahead.
license. I presume that I assume all of you have licenses, right?
I do.
How do you
Mhm.
feel on the highway when you are um, driving next to a tractor trailer,
I'm
a
chill.
huge rig, if you will?
Nervous.
I'm fine.
Nervous.
I do
What?
usually get past them quickly.
Yes, me
Mhm.
too. I'm not standing next to them. There,
I
it's
respect
kind
the
of nerve
laws
wracking.
of I respect the laws of physics tremendously. I recognize that this is just hundreds of tons of steel traveling in excess of 55 miles per hour. So I remember when I was visiting Joe, when I would commute to go see her, it was a 5-6 hour drive. And I was talking to her on my hands free, and 2 lanes over, a cement truck tire blew out while it was driving on the highway. And just the concussive effect from that, like it rocked my car from 2 lanes over. And I was like, what the hell was that? So these big trucks, I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Being a northerner, if I'm behind them on a highway during a snowstorm, I'm so happy because I know that they're moving the snow and they're going to keep moving.
All right, so we do have a few comments. So mandatory minimums, this is Michael Winter. Mandatory minimums have been used in discriminatory manner in this country. Prosecutors also need to stop always seeking maximum penalties. Sometimes they're just being assholes. Daria Winter says mandatory minimums took it out of the hands of the judges originally. Look at the history. The people called for the mandatory minimum sentences initially. Sharice Sepia Blackman says, good afternoon, y'all. Happy and blessed New Year.
Hey,
Happy
Sharice.
New Year.
Happy New Year.
And then Jacqueline Robinson's, the so-called war on drugs brought the issue of outrageous mandatory minimums to scrutiny, especially for the first-time nonviolent offenders. George Fournier says, in Canada, transport vehicles have to have speed limiting systems. Oh, interesting.
I don't know
Governors.
what that
Cool.
law is here. I don't know what that. Yeah, I
They
don't know how
should
that
have that
applies
here.
here. But it sounds like, I mean, he still would have been going beyond that because 80 plus miles per hour in a big
Yeah.
But the
old rig.
system,
Like,
Yeah.
I can't even.
Yeah.
Well, you have to figure, okay, what if the system failed, right?
Yep.
Because
true.
supposedly his brakes failed. What if the
Yep.
system failed? Like, that wouldn't be that much of an issue if he were going or attempting to go the speed limit to begin with.
Yeah.
So I say, yeah, 10 to 15, 10 to 15. 110, absolutely ridiculous.
All right.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Truth, lies,
Is this
Scary
truth,
judge.
lies, or shenanigans?
This is all of it in
Some-
between. Like,
Yeah, there's a little
I'm
bit of truth.
saying
He
the
got some of what he
active-
deserved. Shenanigans from the prosecutor.
the
Yeah.
prosecution
Yeah.
and the
Truth
law
from the
and the
governor.
Colorado state law. And the Colorado state law.
The
yeah,
I don't
the
know about
Colorado
truth from
law
the
is
governor.
like,
I don't know about truth from
they're
the governor.
crazy.
You know, there may be a conflict of interest there. So I don't know about that truth from the governor.
Fair
We'll
enough.
I
see.
could see that.
Fair enough.